Welcome to our celebration of growth. The Evangelical Free Church of the Philippines, or EFCP, was started by the Evangelical Free Church of America, or EFCA, who sent missionaries to the Philippines in the early 1950s. The first missionaries sent by the EFCA were Reverend Lincoln and Phyllis Clobine. The couple arrived in March of 1951 and stayed in Grace Park, Caloocan City, Metro Manila. But not long later, they went back to the USA due to the illness of Mrs. Clobine. In 1952, Reverend Gordon and June Gustafson arrived and stayed in Mambaling, Cebu City. In one of their family devotions, their helper, Lily Handayan, came to know Christ. She later studied in Phoebe's College of Bible and became one of the early workers of the EFCP. While doing language study in Mambaling, Cebu City, the Gustafsons did ministry in Argao, Cebu, about 66 kilometers southeast of Cebu City. Among their first contacts were Artemio Quijano, Macrino Ligunas, and Crispin Albaristini, who became the nucleus of believers in Argao and Hampang EFC. Reverend Dennis and Dorothy Anderson arrived in 1954 and pioneered a church plant in Mambaling, Cebu City. Madeline Nelson and Rosalie Secundino arrived in 1956 and helped the work in Mambaling, and the Andersons moved to Valladolid, Carcar, Cebu, which is 40 kilometers southeast of Cebu City. Reverend and Mrs. Herbert Baker arrived in 1958 and started a church planting work in Poblacion, Carcar, Cebu. Reverend Albert and Esther Anrao arrived in 1959 and reinforced the work in Argao, Cebu. Later in 1966, they went to Lahug, Cebu City and started the church planting work. Reverend Earl and Angie Miller arrived in 1961 and started the work in Dalaget, Cebu, which is 84 kilometers southeast of Cebu City. Reverend Richard and Kay Pixler arrived in 1962 and started the ministry of Chi Alpha Omega Student Center and radio program. In the same year, Reverend Bob and Althea Carey arrived and pioneered a church planting work in Dumanhog, Cebu, which is 73 kilometers southwest of Cebu City. Reverend Robert and Ruth Steves arrived in 1963 and reinforced the work in Barili together with Rosalie Secundino and Madeline Nelson. Barili is 61 kilometers southwest of Cebu City. In the same year, Mildred Nelson and Marion Fry arrived. Mildred helped in the Christian education program of EFCP, and Marion taught at Cebu International School. The first 7 churches that were established under the Evangelical Free Church mission in the Philippines were Argao EFC in 1954, later became Faith EFC. Mambaling EFC in 1958, later became First EFC. Carcar EFC in 1958. Dalaget EFC in 1961. Dumanhog EFC in 1964. Barili EFC in 1964, and Lahug EFC in 1966. These churches then comprised the first EFCP annual conference. The first EFCP annual conference was held in June 1966 at the campus of Central Bible Training Institute in Langtad, Naga, Cebu. About 30 to 40 delegates were in attendance, comprising the pastors, missionaries, and delegates from the first 7 churches. The first major decision of the conference was to draft the EFCP Constitution and bylaws, as well as its articles of incorporation. The Evangelical Free Church of the Philippines was incorporated in 1969. The first charter members of the EFCP National Board of Directors were the following: Reverend Eutimio Aliucod of Mambaling EFC, Reverend Mike Maniego of Karkar EFC, Mr. Cecilio Di Castilla of Dalagit EFC, Mr. Felix Adlawan Sr. of Mambaling EFC, and Mr. Fred Cisneros of Lahug EFC. The growth and development of the EFCP was augmented by the establishment of early institutions and organizations as follows. The Philippine Sunday School Publication, now Philippine Christian Education Publication or PCEP, was established in 1964 under the leadership of Madeleine Nelson. The Women Evangelical Free Church Organization or WEFCO was organized in 1964. The following were members of the core group: Mrs. Teofila Saavedra, Mrs. Mamerta C., Mrs. Luz Villa Sarmiento, Mrs. Norma Maniego, Mrs. Lily Lipardo, Mrs. Fiderita Aliucod, Mrs. Angie Miller, Madeleine Nelson, and Mildred Nelson. The Camp Batu property was purchased in 1964 through the efforts of the early missionaries. The Chi Alpha Omega Student Center was established in 1964, and among its key people were Reverend Albert Anrao, Reverend Richard Pixler, and Reverend Bob Carey. The Short-Term Bible Institute or STBI was established in 1967. Among its key people include Madeleine Nelson, Mildred Nelson, Bining Comaling, and Angie Miller. The radio program, Pulong sa Kinabuhi, started in 1968 with Reverend Tem Aliucod as the anchorman. And the Free Church Youth Movement, or FCYM, was organized in 1973 with Reverend Prisco Aliucod as its first president. He was assisted by Madeleine Nelson and Reverend Joel Villamor. In the early beginnings of the denomination, the leadership was handled by the National Board of Directors. As the work grew, there was a need to hire a full-time president. The following were the present and past presidents of the EFCP. Reverend Tem Aliucod, June 1981 to May 1986. Reverend Mike Maniego, June 1986 to May 1993. Reverend Prisco Aliucod, June 1993 to May 1995. Reverend Romeo Dorio, June 1995 to May 1998. Reverend Alan Abong, June 1998 to May 2002. Reverend Prisco Aliucod, June 2002 to October of the same year. Reverend Ronald Labadan, November 2002 to December 2007. And Reverend Prisco Aliucod, January 2008 up to the present. The Lord has shown favor in the growth of the EFC mission. In 1973, the ministry expanded from Cebu to Luzon. Several years later, the work expanded to Mindanao in the following areas: Davao in 1980, Surigao del Norte in 1983, Agusan in 1985, and Cagayan de Oro in 2001. The work also reached the following areas in the Visayas region: Bohol in 1980, Negros in 1986, Iloilo in 1992, Eastern Samar and Palawan in 2010, and Leyte in 2013. Blessed with a tremendous growth, the work of the EFCP expanded overseas. Filipino churches were established in the following countries: California, USA in 2001, Nagoya, Japan in 2010, and Hong Kong in 2011. To date, there are 118 local churches and 9 international churches in the following areas: Luzon, 24, Visayas, 76, Mindanao, 18, California, USA, 5, Nagoya, Japan, 3, and Hong Kong, 1. Psalm 126 verse 3 is a fitting affirmation of our celebration of growth. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. This is the Evangelical Free Church of the Philippines, celebrating 65 wonderful years.